The full Airflow tutorial for beginners in under 20 minutes. So 10 months ago, I uploaded the very first video on this channel, a 3-minute video explaining what is Airflow. And turns out you all really liked it. Some of you even commented requesting me to make a full tutorial on Airflow. And this video is exactly what you asked for. This is the full Airflow tutorial. Now there are many other Airflow tutorial videos on YouTube. I've watched all of them. Most of them are just kidding. Some of them are really good, but they're hours long, and none of them cover some of the core topics of Airflow that we will cover in this video. Now, what if I told you that in the next 30-ish minutes or so, you can learn everything from all the other tutorials, as well as a lot more in this video? Enough said, let's go. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurav and I create content about data engineering. First things first, let's take a look at the agenda for today. The very first thing we'll look at are the prerequisites that I recommend for this tutorial to be effective for you. Next, we'll take a quick tour of the Airflow UI. Now you are going to be spending a lot of time looking at the UI, so might as well get to know it better, then, right? We'll look at a semi-realistic business use case and then write a super simple and our very first DAG. Then we'll take baby steps towards creating more DAGs. And in that process, we will learn about how to declare DAG definitions, how to declare task dependencies, and Airflow hooks. We will also learn about how to create a custom Airflow operator. So stay tuned and watch this video all the way to the end. That will be followed by concepts such as how to send messages across Airflow tasks using XCOMs. Next, we'll look at some of the core workflow operators such as TriggerDagRun Operator and the BranchPythonOperator. This should be followed by my recommendations for what you should do before productionizing our DAGs. And these include exception handling and setting up failure alerts. And last but not the least, in fact very important, we will learn how to build a CICD pipeline that can automatically deploy code from a GitHub repository's branch to an MWA environment. So there's a lot to cover. Let's jump in. Let's start with the prerequisites for this tutorial. Python. Basic understanding of Python is all you need. You understand concepts such as functions, classes, simple Pythonic data structures such as lists, dictionaries, and things like that, then you're good to go. SQL. Basic SQL querying is all you need. Select, from, where, clauses, that's all. Basic Airflow concepts. You understand basic Airflow concepts such as DAGs and tasks. If you want a quick refresher, I have a quick 3-minute video that you can click here to watch. Docker. A high-level understanding of what is Docker and how it works is all you need. Now, if you really want to get your hands dirty, you could watch this video that I made about how to run Airflow on your local machine using Docker. You, my friend, are going to spend a lot of time looking at the Airflow UI, so might as well spend some time getting to know it. And my goal here is to save you from some of the frustrations, and save your time as well, because Airflow has a few quirky features in the UI that may not be intuitive to its users, especially the beginner users. Let's start by sharing my screen. Okay, so what you're looking at right now is the home page. It's the very first page that loads when you launch Airflow. Now it tells you at a quick glance what DAGs are running, what have failed, what are active, and so on. So all of that information is just one glance away in the UI. Now, as you already might have guessed by now, that there's one row for each DAG here. Let's click on one of them. So what we are looking at right now is the DAG page, or the DAG page view, whatever you want to call it. So top left is the switch on and off button. Now if you want to run a DAG, it has to be switched on. Now, similarly, at the top right here is the trigger DAG button, which runs the DAG. Slightly above it is the schedule, which is a cron expression. Now, for those who don't know what a cron expression is, the best way to understand it is by going to the website crontab.guru. So let me quickly go there. And if we type in our expression here, it'll tell you in English what the schedule is or when is the next run for that schedule. And not only that, it'll also tell you the meaning of the 5 characters in the cron expression. So for example, the first one stands for the minute, then the hour, followed by the day of the month, then the month, and finally the day of the week. So let's head back to our DAG view now. So what you're looking at on the left half of the screen is the grid view. Now when you see it for the first time, you might be a little overwhelmed, but you'll soon realize that it's actually pretty intuitive. So each of these long, narrow rectangles, they represent a DAG run. And the color of these rectangles represent the status of the DAG run. So for example, light green stands for running, red stands for failed, and the dark green color stands for success. Now right below that are tiny squares, and each of those tiny squares represents a task or a task run. Now the grid view is super useful if you want to see the status of many DAG runs at once. At the same time, it's super useful for debugging purposes as well. Now let's click on one of these tiny squares here and see what does it tell me. So for example, if I click on make weekly views predictions of the most recent DAG run, we can see the status of the task, we can see the task ID, which is the task name. It tells us when did it start, when did the task end. I can also go look at the logs of this task. This is particularly useful when I'm developing a new DAG or when we are debugging it. Another useful tab is the graph view. Now I use the graph view when I need to know the dependencies in the DAG. Like how are the tasks dependent on each other? Now in this case, it's a totally linear relationship, or almost totally linear relationship, meaning the first task triggers the second task, which is followed by the triggering of the third task, and so on. Now previous versions of Airflow had arrows over here, but I'm seeing in the new version there are no arrows. Instead, they let you choose a layout. So right now it's left to right. So if I change it to top to bottom, that's how it looks like. Now let's try running a DAG. So I'm going to quickly trigger this DAG from here. As you can see, it started to run. It's light green in color. It's going to auto refresh, and as you can see, each of these turn into dark green, meaning that the tasks are continuing to run. And one of the tasks was actually skipped because it's pink in color. Now one quick detail here, you see this white triangle here. So that means it was manually triggered, which you can also confirm that by looking at the run ID, because it starts with manual __. Had it been a scheduled DAG, no white triangle here. And it starts with scheduled __. Now throughout this tutorial, we'll look at this page a lot, and any code change that we make would be reflected here. Let's take a quick look how would that work. So let me quickly go to the DAG code of this DAG and make a code change. So here I am looking at the code. Here's the task ID. Let me change the task ID to something like this, right? So now if I go back to my browser and refresh this DAG, there you go. Now the task was renamed. So yeah, now I'm going to quickly change it back. Now let's say I want to run just one task in the DAG instead of the whole DAG. Now we can do that. How would I do that is I'm going to click on the task and clear the task. So clearing it will make it run, and only that task to run. Now if we want, we can also manually set the status of a task. So for example, I want to set this task to failed. I could do that from here. Mark as failed. And there you go, it changed to failed. Now let's discuss creating connections and variables. So click on admin. You can see both variables and connections here. Now question that arises here is, what are connections? Why do we need them? When do we use them? Well, the answer to that question is pretty simple, and that is that whenever our DAG and tasks need to interact with the outside world, which could be platforms or systems that are external to Airflow, we would need to create a connection for it. So for example, let's say we want to connect to a Postgres database, then we would have to create a Postgres connection, like here. Similarly, if you want to interact with S3, like use one of the S3 operators, for example, the S3 list operator, then we would have to create an AWS connection, right? So Amazon Web Services. Yeah, from here. Spoiler alert, in the next video, we will learn how to create an AWS connection. So please do watch it. Variables. Similarly, you can configure a secrets backend for variables. Alternatively, variables can be created and updated from the DAG code as well, instead of manually creating it from the UI. Now, as you saw, Airflow lets you create connections and variables from the UI, but I do not recommend it. Now, if you're developing a new DAG, you can do that, but ideally, you'd want to configure a secrets backend for it. That way, connections will automatically be created when you launch Airflow. Now, I'm pretty sure that I'll create a video on it, link in description. That's all I got for you in this video. Next video, we'll actually write our very first DAG. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurav and I make free video content on data engineering. And in this video, we'll learn how to create our first and a very basic DAG in Airflow. To be precise, we'll create a simple DAG that will get data from a very simple DAG that will get data about my YouTube channel using YouTube APIs and store the data to an AWS S3 bucket. And we'll use PythonOperator to do it, which is the most frequently used operator in Airflow. Let's do it! All right, as you can see, I'm at my computer now and I'm gonna share my screen and you're looking at my PyCharm IDE. Now we will use PyCharm IDE throughout this tutorial. So over here, I have a Python script that uses YouTube APIs to get details of all the videos in a YouTube channel. Now, before I do a quick walkthrough of the script, let me tell you that all of this code is in my GitHub repository, links in the description. Okay, so first let me run this program for you so that you'll get a better understanding of what it's doing. So I'm going to say run. There you go, it ran. So as you can see the output, the very first line is the most recent video on my channel, which is Fundamental Principles of Building ETL Pipelines. It was published on October 30. It's a fantastic video. You should definitely go watch it. And similarly, the next video is ETL pipelines explained in 2 minutes and so on. So now I think it's pretty clear what this simple program is doing, right? Now let's look at the Python code real quick. The structure of the code is pretty simple. There are 3 functions. Now for the purpose of this video, it's not really important to know what these functions do, but if you really want to know, you can go check out this video. The link is again in the description. Now if we scroll down a little bit, in the main, we can see that it's creating a YouTube API client and then getting a playlist ID, and that ID becomes an input to the next function called getVideosID, which returns a list of video IDs, which again becomes an input to the next function called getVideoDetails, which returns a dictionary of video details. And finally, we're looping through each element in the dictionary and printing it out. And that's it. Okay, so now I'm going to run the same Python code, but this time in Airflow. And instead of simply printing the output in the console, I will write the output to S3. Now I'll start by creating a new Python file in the DAGs folder, because any new DAG that you create, Airflow wants you to create it in the DAGs folder. So let me go ahead and do that. So I have a subfolder called full Airflow tutorial, which is still inside the DAGs folder. So I'm going to create the new file here. Next, I'll copy the code of the same 3 functions from my other projects in here. So copy and paste. Now I'll add some imports which I know I would need here. And there you have it. Now I'll actually create a 4th function. Now this 4th function will be run by a Python operator task in our DAG. Now what is a Python operator? Now as you know, operators are task templates. So Python operators are task templates for Python code. In other words, Python operators let you run any Python code that you want in Airflow. It is probably the most common type of operator in Airflow. So let's call this function call YouTube APIs, and I'll just copy whatever was in the main here into this function. Boom. So next let's define the DAG. I have a code snippet for that again, so I'm going to just quickly paste it to save time. And I'm going to rename the DAG ID to be YouTube views to S3 demo. How about that? And let's run that at 12. Yeah. So now we have the DAG definition ready. There's one task in this DAG. Let's quickly go to the UI and make sure it shows up. Okay, finally it showed up now. So here it is, YouTube views to S3 demo. So now if I switch it on, it should start running on its own. Okay, it ran. Let's look at the logs here, and it should print the same thing that we saw when we ran the normal Python script from our other project. So that's that. Now next step would be to copy it into S3. Now in order to do that, we will use a hook, an S3 hook. Now what's a hook? Well, you can think of a hook as an interface or a junction between Airflow and an external platform. Now clearly, when we use a hook, we need a connection, an Airflow connection. And in our case, because we are going to connect to an S3 bucket, we have to create an AWS connection. So let's quickly go ahead and do that now. So in the UI, I go to admin and connections. So I already have a connection here, and it's called S3 test, but you can go ahead and create one for yourself. Now all you need is the AWS access key and the AWS secret access key, and that should do it. So now that the connection is created, I will now create the S3 hook in the same function. Actually, in the fourth function, I'm going to say S3 hook, and I have to specify the AWS connection ID equals S3 test. Okay. Now I will also create a string IO object, which you can think of it as an in-memory text object, and let's call it CSV buffer. Next, we are converting the dictionary, the output dictionary, into a data frame and writing it as a CSV string to the same string buffer. Now next step is to load this string to S3. So now to do that, let's go check out what functions are available in S3 hooks. Okay, so I have the documentation for the S3 hooks open here, and if I search for string, let's see what shows up. Okay, very cool. So there is a function called load string here, which lets you, convenience to drop a string in S3. So this is exactly what I want to use here. So it takes in arguments string data, the key, which is the S3 key in the bucket, and the bucket name. So let's go ahead and use this same function, and boom. So I'm using load string, I mentioned the CSV file name, the bucket name. Okay, so now let's go ahead and run the DAG again. Okay, so here's the DAG again. Let me trigger it. It's about to run, and it ran. Let's see, here's my YouTube bucket demo, the bucket that I created, and if I refresh this, we should see another file here. There you have it. So the file is called video details, and it should have the same output. So if I download it, let me quickly open up and show it to you. There it is. It's the same output. So that's it. So there you go. That's how you can write a very simple DAG using Python operator to get data about a YouTube channel and copy it over to S3. Now, if you have any further questions, you can message me on Instagram, and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. If you're still watching this video, you are a champion. I'm proud of you because you have strong control over your mind. Trust me, I totally understand that how easy it is to mentally check out when you're watching a video like this. Scrolling on TikTok and Instagram is way easier, but you chose to not to do that because you are a champion. In the next video, we'll learn how to copy those CSV files that's sitting in our S3 bucket over to a Postgres database. So see you in the next one. Peace. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurav and I make free content on data engineering. And in this video, we will learn how to create an Airflow task that will copy data from an AWS S3 bucket into a Postgres database. And how exactly are we going to do that? We will use a hook. We will use a Postgres hook inside a Python operator. Now let's check out how to do that. Okay, so I'm back at my desk and I'll start by sharing my screen. So looking at this DAG that we created in the last video, it's copying data from YouTube APIs to an S3 bucket. Now next step is to take this file and dump it to a Postgres table, right? Now you might be wondering, why do we need to copy the YouTube API data file to S3 and then to Postgres, right? why can't we just directly copy it into Postgres and skip S3 altogether? You could actually do that, but there are multiple ways to skin a cat, you know. And I'd also say that copying it into S3 is still useful. It's valuable because it'll be just like a trail, you know, an audit trail. You'll have a record of what was actually inserted into the table. So which can be useful, let's say, when the job breaks, right? So then you can go into S3 and look at that file and basically investigate. So now in order to copy the CSV file to Postgres, we'll use a Postgres hook. And for using any kind of hook, as you know, the first thing that you got to do is create a connection. So let's go ahead and create that. So admin, connections, if I scroll down, so I do actually have the connection created over here already. This is hosted in RDS. So as you can see, it ends with rds.amazonaws.com. Okay, what else do we need to do? So we need to create the table, right, in the Postgres database so that we can load the contents. Now Postgres is not smart enough to do it for us, so we're going to go ahead and actually create the table. Now how do we do that? It's actually pretty simple. So here I already have the create table code for it. So let me go ahead and run it. Boom. And then if I run the select on it, there's nothing in there, right? You can see the structure, you can see the columns, but it's all empty because there's nothing in there. Now let's go back to the DAG code. Now the very first thing that I'm going to do is create a new function called load S3 file to PG. And then we are going to create two hooks, one for the Postgres. So as you can see, I'm using the Postgres connection. Second hook for S3, where I'm using the AWS connection. So two hooks. Next step is we download the file from S3 to our local machine. I mean, not exactly local machine, but into our Airflow's task executor. And then what? See, I'm printing out the file just for the sake of clarity. And then what's next? Pretty simple, right? We create a Postgres connection from the hook. We create a cursor, which we'll use to run the copy export, and we'll run the copy command, which will actually copy the file to the Postgres table. And finally we commit it, and this is just like best practice stuff, you know, because we don't need the file anymore after it's been copied over to Postgres. So we are going to delete it and we're going to close out the connection, just keeping things clean over here. And then the very last thing we do before we run the DAG is create a new task for this Python function. So it's going to be, of course, a Python operator. I'm calling this task S3 to Postgres, and then at the very last line here is the dependency for it. So let's go back to the DAG code and try to run it. So here's my DAG here, and I can see a new task here, S3 to Postgres. So let me go ahead and run this because everything looks good to me so far. So now the task is also done. So run was successful. Let's go to the Postgres database and actually verify. Let's run the select again. Run it, please. There you go. So now there's data in there, right? So that means the DAG ran successfully. That's it. And that's it. I hope that made sense. In the next video, we will learn how to create our very own operators. Yep, you heard it right. We will create our very own operator. We will take an existing Airflow operator and make it even better using a very common feature of object-oriented programming called inheritance. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurav and I create free video content on data engineering, and you are watching a quick tutorial on how to create custom Airflow operators. Now at this point, I assume that you have worked with a few Airflow operators. Now don't get me wrong, the available off-the-shelf operators are good. However, they don't fit a specific use case that you got, and you wish that this operator could actually solve the specific problem that you got. Look no further, because in this video, we will take an available Airflow operator and customize it to suit our very special need. Now, what do I exactly mean by customize an operator? Well, we will add a new supporting feature, some additional functionality to an existing operator. And we will achieve it by leveraging a very common mechanism in object-oriented programming called inheritance. Let's check out how that can actually be done. Let's set the scene by sharing my screen. Now, I want to copy a file from S3 to a Postgres database. So let's go check out the Postgres operator documentation. So let me go and open it up here. Okay, and here I want to quickly scan the capabilities of the Postgres operator. Okay, so what am I seeing here? So I'm seeing that I can create a Postgres table. What else? I can insert data to a Postgres table. Okay, very good, wonderful. What else? I can fetch records from a Postgres table, and I can pass parameters like this, for example. Okay, that's fine. Pass configuration parameters as well. And looks like that's it. So that is all I can do. So that means if I want to do something like this, assuming this is my task definition, so it's a Postgres operator, I pass the task ID, the SQL, and the connection ID, it'll run. But what if I wanted to pass 3 extra parameters to it? Like for example, the full S3 key, the Postgres table name, and the AWS connection ID, so that it'll pick up the file in the full S3 key location and insert it to the Postgres table name. Will it be able to do that? No, it cannot. Absolutely not. It'll just not work. But we will make it work. Yep, we are going to create our very own personalized Postgres operator, and I'm going to call it my Postgres operator. So the very first step to do is to create a custom operator in the plugins directory. So let me go to my plugins directory. There it is. So as you can see, I've already created one here. Let's look at the operator definition now. At line 10, line 10 is very important. So line 10 is saying my operator should inherit the Postgres operator. So that means my operator, my Postgres operator, is a child class of the Postgres operator, which means I want my Postgres operator to have all the capabilities of the Postgres operator. And of course, there would be some additional capabilities too. Now, what are those additional capabilities? Well, those are defined in the execute function down here, which we'll look at in a bit. Now, a bit about the execute function. Now, every Airflow operator has an execute function. It's the function that runs when any operator runs. So if you run any operator, it would run its execute function. We also need to create an init function. Init is short for initialize. It behaves just like any other Python init function. So the init function runs when we invoke an object of a Python class. And in this case, my Postgres operator is a Python class. Now, let's quickly check out what's happening in the init function. And the very first thing I'm doing here is I'm calling the init function of the parent class, right? Now, because I want my operator to have all the capabilities of the Postgres operator. And the second thing that I'm doing here is passing the values of the extra parameters, which are these 3, right? Full S3 key, AWS connection ID, and Postgres table name. Now, this is needed for it to support the extra functionality that we want to build, right? Now, let's look at the execute function. So I have an if statement where I'm saying if the extra parameters PG table name and the full S3 key are not none, or that means if they're populated, then go ahead and copy the file, download the file from S3 and copy it into Postgres here. Now, this entire code snippet in the if block is exactly the same as what we looked at in the previous video. So I'm not going to walk through this code again. Cool. So that's the if, and what's happening in the else? Well, it's just calling the execute function of the parent class. So super.execute. So which means give me all the capabilities of the Postgres operator, basically, right? Well, I hope that made sense. Now let's go to the UI. Okay, I see my DAG here. Let's click on it. And if I go to the graph view, so now I see a new task. And what type of task is this? As you can see, it's my Postgres operator. It's not the regular Postgres operator, it's my Postgres operator, right? So now let's run this DAG. Boom. Okay, it ran successfully. Wonderful, right? Let's actually go check in the table if it at all inserted any data or not. Run it, please. Yep, it did. Okay, now wait. So we are not done yet. We are not done yet. So now we know my Postgres operator works, but does it actually have all the capabilities of the regular Postgres operator as well? Well, let's find out. And how can we do that? Let's write an extra task at the end. So I do actually have it here just to save time, I want to save your time. I'm all about saving time. So this one, so let me uncomment this. This task is validate SQL. My Postgres operator, I give it a task ID of ytpg test, and then it's just doing a select, right? So now let's see if this one works. So I should see a new task in my DAG. Come on, there it is. A new task is here. If I go to the graph view, it is another my Postgres operator, right? So let's run this. And the third task was successful. Let's go look at the logs of the third task. Boom, yeah, it did run it successfully. So that means our operator has all the capabilities of the regular Postgres operator. Going back to our class definition, yeah, we did not write any code to execute any SQL statement, right? But it still executed SQL statements in the very last task, as we saw, right? So how did that happen? Well, my friend, that's the power of inheritance. Because in this case, what happened is when we ran the task, the execute function was running and it skipped the ifs block and it went to else. So that's why it ran the regular Postgres operator's code. And that'll be it for this video. I really hope that you found this video to be useful. Now, if there's something that didn't make sense, or if you think that there's something I could have explained at a greater depth, then do let me know in the comment section. Otherwise, I'll see you in the next one where we'll learn about how to trigger a DAG from another DAG using the TriggerDagRun operator. Yep, a very useful concept explained in 5 minutes. The TriggerDagRun operator fully explained in 3 minutes. Hi there, my name is Saurav and I create free content on data engineering. And I see it is indeed wonderful that you just wrote your nice little DAG. Next, you want to figure out how to run it. Do you want to run this DAG exactly after an upstream DAG finishes running? Or do you not want to run this if the upstream DAG fails? Or do you only want to run your DAG when a certain condition is met? Well, my friend, for all of these 3 scenarios, I have got exactly one simple solution for you, and that is to use the TriggerDagRun operator. Allow me to demonstrate. Okay, so the very first thing we need to do is to figure out which DAG to run using the TriggerDagRun operator. So in my case, I know what that DAG is. It's called MLDemoDAG. So next, I'm going to go to the documentation of TriggerDagRun operator, the TriggerDagRun operator, and in here, so if I scroll down, I think the first parameter. So as you can see, it supports so many parameters, but all I'm interested in is this TriggerDagRun ID parameter. So now let's go back to PyCharm, and yeah, I already have the task for it here. As you can see, I'm calling it trigger task. The task ID is trigger MLDemoDAG, and like I was saying, the DAG that I wanted to trigger is called MLDemoDAG. And then finally, I have the dependencies set up here. Cool. So now let's go to the UI and run this DAG. Here's my DAG over here. I see a task called trigger MLDemoDAG. If I go to the graph view, it is a TriggerDagRun operator, so everything looks perfect. Now if I turn it on, it should start run on its own. And it started to run on its own. Because I have a schedule, so that's why it started running on its own, by the way. Oops, it failed. What? That's what happens when you prepare too much for a video. Okay, let's go look at the logs. Why did it fail? Okay, it's saying that DAG ID MLDemoDAG doesn't exist or not found. Okay, that's easy to fix. Let me actually pick out a DAG that exists here. So what should I do? Let's see here. Okay, XCOM demo is short enough. So let me go back to PyCharm and let me just say XCOM demo. And then here I'm going to say XCOM demo. Cool, back to the UI. Okay, let's see if this works now or not. Okay, now it works. And I want you to take good care of yourself today. And that is it, the TriggerDagRun operator that makes it super simple and easy to synchronize your DAG runs. Now that you're still watching this video, you might as well watch the next one, which is about BranchPython operators and XCOM. As always, I've made a crisp video explaining everything you need to know about BranchPython operators in 3 minutes. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurav and I create free content on data engineering. And in this video, we will learn about the BranchPython operator in Airflow. There may be scenarios in which you'd want to run only some Airflow tasks in a DAG and not all of the tasks. And in order to determine which tasks to skip during a DAG run, we will use XCOMs to let the tasks communicate with each other. A DAG like that can easily be built using a combo of BranchPython operator and XCOMs, where XCOMs can be used to let the tasks communicate with each other by sending messages, and the BranchPython operator can be used to determine which tasks to run and which ones to skip. Now let's dive in and figure out how to exactly implement that. So let's set the scene by sharing my screen. So let's imagine a scenario. So let's assume that there's this DAG that automates a social media workflow. So what do I mean by that? So let's assume there's this social media influencer or company who wants to figure out if they should run an ad campaign or not based on the number of weekly views on their YouTube channel or Instagram page. So the first task here is a get YouTube data task, and then followed by a pre-process task. So get YouTube data gets the data, and then pre-processing is done. And then the third task is make weekly views prediction. And that task could be a machine learning code that predicts the number of views on the channel or page for the next week. And as you can see, the task after that is a BranchPython operator, and it's connected to two downstream tasks. Depending on the logic of the BranchPython operator, only one only one out of the two downstream tasks can run. So let's say, for example, if there's a views threshold, and if the threshold is 3,500 views in the BranchPythonOperator task, so that means if predicted views is less than 3,500, then the run add campaign needs to run. Otherwise, the end task would run. Okay, so now let's check out how to implement that in Airflow code. So I'll go back to PyCharm, and here's the DAG. And yeah, like I was saying, the very first two tasks are dummy operators, right? And then the next task is the make weekly views prediction task, which is calling a Python function called predict views. So let's check out the function definition of predict views. So as you can see, it's returning a dictionary. What's that dictionary? So each element has a key whose keys are video IDs, and the values are the weekly views. And this is where XCOM comes into the picture, right? So the return value gets stored or gets pushed to XCOM. Now we will very soon see how we can pull that XCOM data when we look at the next task. Now a bit about XCOMs. So I want to briefly touch on what exactly happens when something is pushed to XCOMs.
Well, XCOMs is literally a Postgres table. So Airflow has a metadata where it stores all the metadata that it needs.
That is right. So let me show you the ER diagram from the Airflow official documentation. This is the ER diagram for the metadata, which is a Postgres database. And if I keep scrolling down, as you can see, there's so many tables here, but there should be an XCOM table. There it is. So when our function returns that dictionary gets stored in this particular table, the XCOM table. Okay, moving on back to the code. So the next task is the BranchPythonOperator, which is calling another Python function, and it's called the branchfunc. So if we go back into the definition, as you can see, so the XCOM lives in a context dictionary called kwargs, and we are pulling the XCOM data in line number 23. And what XCOM data are we pulling? We are pulling the XCOM data of the task make weekly views prediction. So we are passing a dictionary and we are calculating the average views from the dictionary. And that's where the threshold that I was talking about, if it's less than 3,500, it'll return run add campaign string. It's a string, but it's actually the ID of the next task that it wants to run. And else it'll run the stop task. Okay, so if it's a bit overwhelming, let me try to summarize. So every task in a DAG can pull the XCOM data for any other task in the same DAG. Now in our case, here's what the BranchPythonOperator is doing. So it's pulling data from the XCOM of the predict views task, and then it does some processing on it. Like we saw, it's calculating the average, and then it returns the name or the ID of the next task that it wants to run. So now let's run the DAG. Okay, so now it's running. Cool. So what happened here? So the end task was skipped and it ran the run add campaign. So that was the data-driven decision made by the BranchPythonOperator. So now let's look at why did it do that? Yep. So the average was 3327, so which was less than the threshold of 3,500. So that's why the run add campaign task was run. Simple. And that is it for this video, everybody. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to let me know in the comments section. Or you can also message me on Instagram. Otherwise, click here to watch the next video where I talk about how to handle errors and set up failure alerts in Airflow. Until next time, peace. Hey there everybody, my name is Saurabh and I make free video content on data engineering. Do you ever feel annoyed or frustrated because your Airflow job failed? And you often have a hard time figuring out the reason for the failure. Why did it fail? What's the root cause of my job failure? How can I get notified when a job fails? If you answered yes to any of these questions, then this video is exactly for you. Let's take a look. Part of the tutorial is actually inspired by my last video, which is the fundamental principles of building ETL pipelines. Now, if you have not watched it, I highly recommend that you go watch it. I'll put a link up here so that you can go watch it, and that'll give you more clarity on what I'm going to talk about in this video. So as you keep on creating DAGs, new DAGs, DAG after DAG in your environment, over time, some of them will fail, right? Failures are inevitable. And once that happens, an important question to ask is, how can we manage those failures, right? And of course, we want to quickly fix them as well. So my friend, that is exactly what we are going to learn in this video. So we'll start with our same old DAG, the YT APIs to Postgres DAG. And to make it ready for production, we'll do three things. Number one, we'll have the job automatically retry a task whenever it fails. Now this can be achieved in two ways. Number one is using the retry decorator from Python. And then number two is using a DAG parameter, a DAG config parameter called retries. Then we will learn how to efficiently diagnose and handle production failures using logging statements and exception handling in Python. And finally, we'll set up Slack notifications for any DAG failures. So whenever a job fails, we are notified about it instantly. Now, when a job succeeds, you can still set it up to send you notifications as well. So let's start by setting up job retry. Going to my wonderful old DAG here. Now let's add a retry decorator to the call YouTube APIs function here. Now, why this function? Well, this function makes API calls to an API server, right? So sometimes the server may be down, maybe there's maintenance going on, it could be shut down for whatever reason. So the best thing at this point, what we can do is wait for a bit, and then after a few seconds, run the same function again. And in order to do that, I've imported retry and then added a retry decorator. Now, looking at the arguments of this decorator, the first one is exceptions, which is just the exception that I want to catch and retry the function again. Now we can pass more than one exception here. Second is tries, so that's the number of attempts, right? And finally, delay. Delay is how long do I want to wait in seconds before retrying. So in my case, it's just 3 seconds. Now there are other parameters as well that are supported by retry, which if you would like, you can look up in the docs. Now to test this, how do we test this, right? So because YouTube APIs are working just fine, I know it. So what I'm going to do is at the very end of this function, I'm going to raise an exception. Okay, so let's run the DAG now. And it started to run. Let's look at the logs. So as you can see in the logs, it's automatically retrying the task because it's printing the same logs each time. Now, another way of achieving the same functionality is through a DAG configuration parameter. And that's another very simple way of doing it. So let me quickly show you how to do that. So back to my DAG code here. Yeah, it's very simple. So we're going to pass default args, which is a dictionary. And what elements does this dictionary have? First one is called retries, which is the number of reattempts. And then retry delay, which is how long do I want it to wait before retrying. So now let's run the DAG and trigger. It failed. So what happened here? Let's see. If we go to the logs, okay, by attempt. So now it's become yellow. If you see yellow means it's up for retry. And we also see a second log attempt. So there was one first attempt and then the second attempt. So this time, because we set the retries at the DAG level, so we are seeing 2 different log files, 1 log file for each attempt. And there are 3 log files because there are 2 retries, so a total of 3 log files. So that's how you can retry your tasks. Next, let's learn about logging and exception handling. Now this will apply to particularly the Python functions. So let me go pick a Python function. Let's say, for example, get playlist ID. What I'm going to do is I'm going to put the entire code here inside a try except block. Now, as you can see in the except block, I'm checking for key error, which will happen when the response doesn't have the key called items. So the most likely reason for that to happen is when our credentials are invalid. So I can have a custom log message here as shown in the error log, right? So where it's saying key was not found, possibly credentials are invalid. So you can put a custom log message in the error log. So now to test it, let me quickly change the credentials files and make the credentials actually invalid. And then let's run the DAG. Now it will fail, but now I'll have a good error message which can quickly help me identify the problem and fix it. Okay, let's find out how to set up Slack alerts in Airflow. Now you can set up Slack alerts for email or whatever messaging service that you want to use, but today we will use Slack. Now the very first thing we need to do is go to api.slack.com/app. Now I'm in here, so now I'm going to say create new app. Create new app from scratch. Give it a name, so I'm going to give it, let's say, Slack app demo. Okay, asking me to pick a workspace, so I have one workspace created for this demo, so I'm going to say create app next. So next we want to add some features and functionality. So this Slack app is going to post messages, right? So all I need is the incoming webhooks, right? So I'm going to click on that and turn it on because it was deactivated. So when it's on, yeah, then I have to add it to the workspace. Boom, and it's asking me for the channel name. So I'll say full Airflow tutorial, allow. There you go, it's added. It generated a webhook URL, so I'm going to quickly copy it and save it. And we'll also go to OAuth and permissions section, and over here we'll see an auth token. So I'm going to also save this. We would need both of these, both the auth token and the webhook URL. Next, we'll create the Slack connection. Now it can be done from the UI. I already have one created, but let me show you how to do that. So admins and connections, and in here, yeah, I have one created, which is called Slack connection. But I'm going to still create one, so click on plus, Slack on blah, whatever, right? Connection type is going to be Slack API, and then all we have to do is just slap on the API token in here, which we saved a few minutes ago, right? And then save it. Okay, so quick side note, so we can also configure a secrets backend. Yep, MWA lets you set up a secrets backend. so that you don't have to manually create these connections, right? So I have a video on how to do that. So if you want, you can click on the info card over here and watch it. Next, let's look at our code. So all I've done is created a new task, which is using a Slack API post operator. And in here, I'm passing the Slack connection ID, which is the connection that we created from the UI. And then we're passing the channel name to which we want to send the message to. And then in the text field, we're passing the actual message that we want to send. Now, as you can see in the text, we have a Jinja template here. So this is supposed to dynamically pick up the name of the DAG. Cool. And then I am just adding the dependency for the task, which means it's going to run at the very end. So let's go check out the UI now. That's my DAG name, failure alert demo. And in here, I should see the notify success. Yep, the Slack API post operator. Okay, so now let's run it. DAG run was successful. Let's go look at the channel, the Slack channel. Yep, there's a new message. The time is 9:40 a.m. and I see that message. Okay, so now we got a notification when the DAG run was successful. Next, how can we set up a notification for when the DAG actually fails? So well, that is also pretty simple. So let's quickly look at the code. If I go to my DAG definition here at line 165, I'm passing a config parameter called onFailureCallback, which means if any of the tasks in this DAG fails, then it will run this function, which I'm passing, which is called notify failure. So let's go look at what's in that notify failure. And yep, so in here, I'm passing the webhook URL. So it's a constant, the Slack webhook, which we saved while we were creating the Slack app. If you remember, we had saved the webhook URL. So we are passing that webhook URL here. Also have the message that we want to send to Slack when the task fails. And then all I'm doing is creating a post request and passing the webhook URL and the message that we want to send to Slack. So now let's run this DAG. Actually, before we do that, what I'm going to do is just let me change the table name here so that I know it'll actually fail. So going back to my UI here, let's run the DAG. Okay, now it failed. Let's go back to the Slack channel. There it is. I have the failure notification here. That's it. And that was it. Now you know how to handle errors and set up failure notifications in Airflow. Next video, let's figure out how to set up an automatic code deployment pipeline that deploys code from GitHub to MWAA. And no one on YouTube has ever made a video on it. See you there. Peace. Hi there, my name is Saurav and I make free video content on data engineering. And in this video, we'll learn how to create a CI/CD pipeline that deploys code from a pull request in GitHub to an MWA environment. Let's take a look. Let's get this going by sharing my screen. First off, I want to make sure that you have two things already created. Number one, an MWA Airflow environment, and number two, an S3 bucket for the Airflow environment. Now, I have mine created already. An S3 bucket for the Airflow environment is here, and then the Airflow environment itself is actually being created as I speak. Now let me show you how the pipeline should work. Okay, so let's say this is you, and you want a version control mechanism for your Airflow code. And in this case, we will use GitHub. When you push your code or merge a pull request to the main branch, for example, then that commit to the main branch would trigger a CI/CD pipeline. And the CI/CD pipeline would do exactly two things. Number one, it'll copy the code files from your branch, the main branch, to S3, and then it'll create a zip file of all the stuff that's in the plugins folder in your repository, and again copy it to S3. Well, now a good question to ask here is, why do we need to zip up the plugins folder? Well, turns out AWS wants us to deploy it that way, so we're just going to do it. And now the most important question you can ask here is, how do you build a pipeline like that? And I have a very simple CloudFormation script that we'll go over in a bit. But basically, this CloudFormation script is going to create an AWS code pipeline resource, a code build resource, an S3 bucket to store the code artifacts, and some other supporting AWS services, which we'll look at in a bit. For those who may not know what is CloudFormation, it's just an AWS's way of doing Terraform. So it's infrastructure as code, basically. So now let's check out the code to build the pipeline. All of this code is in my GitHub repository and links in the description. Now I put all of this code in a new folder called CICD pipeline code, as you can see. Now let's look at the very first file, which is the CICD.yaml file. And as you can see, at the top is a parameters block which contains a bunch of parameters that we have to supply. Now, what do these parameters mean? We'll see that in a minute. And before that, let's go check out what resources it's going to create. So let me just minimize that. And yeah, let's look at the resources. So it's creating an artifact store S3 bucket. It's going to create a code pipeline. It's going to create a code build project. It's going to create a CloudWatch event rule, actually 2 rules, and then a pipeline role, and then a code build IAM role. Now, if none of this is making much sense to you, you don't need to worry about it. It's fine, because it's not really important what these resources are doing, except for the code build project. Yeah, let's look at the code build project command. So these commands are instructions of what exactly is going to happen when a deployment is triggered. It's a combination of AWS CLI commands and some shell commands. The very first thing it's doing is an AWS S3 sync, which is essentially copying files from our local to the S3 bucket. And then, like I was saying, if you remember a few minutes ago, that we need to zip up the plugins folder, right? So it's creating a zip from the plugins folder and also copying that plugins zip to the S3 bucket. And then I have another sync. And another important thing here is to understand what do these parameters at the top mean, right? So I have 7 parameters that we need to specify here, and the values for those parameters are actually in the other file, which is this JSON file. Let's look at the 7 parameters that we need to pass now. So the very first parameter is the S3 bucket name. So it's the bucket to which we want to deploy our code to. Number 2 is GitHub repo name. Next is the GitHub repo owner. So that's going to be me, my name. Then we have the GitHub repo token. So I haven't specified it here, but you can create it from the developer settings in GitHub UI. It starts with something like GHP_. Cool. Number 5 is the branch. So in this case, I have a branch called full tutorial. In my GitHub repository, any commit to this branch is supposed to trigger the deployment. So that's what this branch is. And then the next 2, number 6 and number 7, can be any name that you want, but these are essentially the name of the code pipeline that's going to be created behind the scenes, and then the code build project. So I have specified them here. And once we have plugged in the correct parameters, it's time to run the script. And how are we going to run the script? Is using a create stack command. Now, what is a stack? Now, a stack is just a collection of AWS resources. So instead of creating one resource at a time, AWS provides you with stacks. So that means you can create a group of resources. You can update or delete a group of resources all at once. Now, grouping resources is just a convenience, right? It makes it easy to manage multiple resources at once. Let me run this command. It's called AWS CloudFormation create stack, where I'm giving this stack a name, which is the name of the group of resources that I want to create, which is Airflow CICD. Next one is the file. So this has instructions on what resources have to be created. And finally, we are also passing this JSON file, which has all the parameters that we need to pass to that script, CICD.yaml, and that's it. So let's just run this and let's see what happens. Boom. Let's go to CloudFormation and we can see the status. Okay, I can see that create is in progress. We can also see the events, what's going on. So it's creating them, still creating. Come on, man, how long does it take to create a stack? Buddy. It shouldn't take you this long, come on. Okay, creation is done. Now, I'm going to go to code pipelines and see if the pipeline exists. Okay, it does exist, but for some reason, it's failed. Okay, it's unable to connect to my GitHub. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit this, the source stage. So let's edit this. And then I'm going to, it probably needs me to manually connect to GitHub for security reasons. So let me do that. So confirm. Now it's configured. Now I select my repository name. I select my branch name. Now it's done. And then if I say save, yes, please save it. And what's happening now? Okay, now it's successful. And now it's deploying the code. Perfect. So it's deploying stuff into the S3 bucket. So let's go to the S3 bucket. We can see all of the code was copied into this S3 bucket. Now, just for the sake of testing, let's do one thing. Let's create a new file here. New file, test deployment .txt. And let's make sure that this also gets deployed when I push a commit to my branch. Okay, so let me add some random text. This is a test. Now I'll commit this. Make sure it's commit into the correct branch. Yes, it is. Git commit, test commit, And then I push it to my branch called full tutorial. Now the moment I push it, it should trigger a build in that pipeline. So if we go to the pipeline again, there you go, it's in progress. So now it's pulling the changes. So there was a new commit, it was detected, and now it's deploying the new file to my S3 bucket. Okay, deployment was successful. Going to the S3 bucket now. There it is, test deployment.txt, it's here. Amazing, so that works. Thank you. And that's it. All the code that we looked at today are here in my GitHub repository. Please feel free to check it out, copy it, clone it, it's all yours. What other Airflow questions do you have? Please let me know in the comments. What other data engineering questions do you have? Again, let me know in the comments. Signing off, peace.